So anyone who's, spent any time with Korean culture, well, soju is just everywhere, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely inescapable.
Right. You've probably seen it in K-dramas or maybe at Korean BBQ places, maybe even shared a bottle yourself. But what if we told you that the soju you think you know?
Hmm.
Well, it's really only half the picture.
Hmm.
Our mission today is to really dive deep into the fascinating, surprisingly complex, and honestly deeply historical world of soju.
Yeah.
We want to show you that there isn't just one kind, and understand how its whole identity got shaped by centuries of Korea's history, the good and the bad.
That's exactly it. We'll be looking at two fundamentally different categories.
Yeah.
Distilled soju and diluted soju.
Okay.
And like our sources say, they're really sky and ground apart. It's a huge difference. So to get it, we need to look at, old documents, key government policies, big cultural shifts, all the things that led to these two very different drinks sharing the same name.
Okay, let's start right there then. Let's unpack this. When we say soju, we're actually talking about two different things. Can you break down the traditional one first, the one that's maybe less common today?
Yeah, absolutely. So fundamentally, soju, the name itself means burned liquor. It's a traditional Korean distilled spirit.
Right.
Now, the type we call distilled soju, or you might hear it called premium soju, traditional soju, or AC,
Yeah.
it's made by fermenting grain starch, usually rice, with something called nuoc.
Ah, the fermentation starter.
Exactly, the traditional Korean starter. This fermented base, it could be jeongju, which is like a clear rice wine, or yakju, a medicinal liquor, or even tokju, the cloudy stuff.
Okay.
That base is then single distilled. And that single distillation, that's really key.
Why is that?
Because it lets the soju keep all the rich, deep flavor and aroma from the original ferment. You get this subtle rice umami, a really nice finish, and importantly, no added sweeteners, nothing artificial. And what's really interesting is that this traditional spirit was originally just called soju, simple as that.
Huh. So what changed?
Well, government policies back in the 60s and 70s basically pushed it aside. It ended up sort of ceding the common name soju to the much cheaper version, the diluted kind.
Oh, well.
Yeah. So now you often have to say distilled soju or traditional soju, just to be clear what you mean. And the price difference, it's significant.
How significant?
Even a basic distilled soju costs at least 3, maybe 4 times more than the green bottle stuff. And the really premium ones could be up to 30 times pricier.
30 times.
Yeah, it comes down to the raw materials, the rice, and just how complex and careful the production process is. Alcohol-wise, it's usually around 25% to 40% ABV. Historically, it was definitely seen as a strong liquor in Asia.
Okay, that paints a really clear picture of the traditional sort of heritage soju. But like you said, the one most of us know, the green bottle, that's different.
Completely different. That's diluted soju, or different origin, different production, everything.
Where did that come from?
It was actually invented in Japan back in 1899. They called it Shinshiki Shochu. It then came over to Korea during the Japanese colonial period, probably around the 1910s.
And how's it made? You said it's different.
Drastically different. Instead of that careful single distillation of a quality ferment, diluted soju uses continuous distillation. And they use really cheap raw materials, things sometimes called low-cost carbohydrates, potato, cassava, even molasses.
Okay, so not rice.
Not typically, no.
Okay.
This continuous process creates a very neutral alcohol, almost pure ethanol, called jujung.
Jujunjung.
Got it. Then they take this neutral jujung and just dilute it with water and add artificial sweeteners, things like stevioside, aspartame, to give it some kind of palatable taste.
Ah, so that's where the sweetness comes from.
Exactly. And the key thing is, unlike distilled soju, this process completely strips away any original flavor or aroma for the raw ingredients.
Right.
I mean, honestly, the stuff they used to make jujung, if you tried to single distill that, it would probably smell and taste pretty bad.
Huh. Makes sense.
So the main draw for diluted soju, both then and now, was always its incredibly low production cost. That's really what fueled its massive popularity and market dominance over the decades.
So even though they share the name soju,
They're fundamentally different drinks, sky and ground like we said. Even if you don't think you have a refined palate, you can usually taste the difference if you try them side by side.
that distinction really sets the stage. It feels like there's a much deeper story here about how Korea's history played into all this. How did these two sojus evolve over time?
Oh, it's fascinating how much the history of soju mirrors the history of Korea itself. I mean, alcohol in Korea goes way, way back.
How far back?
We have records mentioning alcohol from the Gojoseon era, like in the ancient song Gomudo Haga. And then archaeological finds, historical texts from the Three Kingdoms period onwards, they show it was widely consumed. By the Silla period, there was even established drinking etiquette. So this idea of Koreans being, alcohol-loving people, it's ancient, really deep roots.
And the distillation part, when did that arrive?
Well, the technology itself started ages ago, like 5,000 years back in Mesopotamia. Then it got refined through Persian and Arab alchemy.
Right.
That Persian method eventually reached Goryeo, probably brought by the Mongol Yuan dynasty.
Ah, the Mongol connection.
Exactly. And when soju first appeared in Goryeo, they even called it things like arakil or aragil, which sound a lot like the Mongol word arki.
Makes sense.
But because it used so much rice, and rice was often scarce, it was considered really valuable, almost like medicine, something mainly for the wealthy.
So it wasn't an everyday drink back then.
Not for most people, no. But then came the Joseon dynasty, and that saw this incredible flourishing of Gyeongju homemade liquor.
Gyeongju.
Yeah, hundreds of unique recipes popped up. People used all sorts of local ingredients, medicinal herbs, flowers, sometimes even, believe it or not, animal-based ingredients.
Wow, really?
Yeah, especially noble families. They developed really sophisticated Gyeongju for rituals, for medicine, for entertaining guests. This pushed the development of really high-quality specialized nuruk, the starter, and these long, slow, low-temperature fermentation methods. Really artisanal stuff.
Sounds amazing, but things didn't stay that way.
No, there was a big setback. King Yangzhou brought in a strict prohibition in 1756.
Prohibition, why?
Concerns about rice consumption, social order, things like that. But the effect was it forced nuruk making underground.
Ah,
And those traditional, high-quality, open-air, slow methods, they got replaced by faster, cheaper, sort of semi-sealed methods needed for brewing secretly. This really hurt the quality of traditional liquor overall.
did the ban last long?
King Jiangzhou eventually lifted it. But by then, the damage was kind of done. The market got flooded by the cheaper, faster-made stuff from the former illegal brewers who are now aiming at commoners, not the nobility.
So quality dropped.
Pretty significantly, yeah.
Yeah.
And then came another huge disruption, the Japanese colonial era, from 1910 to 1945.
Right. How did that impact things?
Massively. First, the colonial government brought in strict liquor tax laws, the Juzi Rayong. They heavily taxed home-brewed Gyeongju. Then they started requiring licenses, but made it incredibly hard for Koreans to actually get them.
So they squeezed out home brewing.
Exactly. Countless traditional recipes were just lost. Homebrewing went even further underground. And at the same time, this is when that cheap, mass-produced diluted soju from Japan started coming in around the 1910s.
The Shinshiki Shochu.
Yep. And because it was so cheap, it quickly started taking over the market from the traditional distilled soju.
And then the wars.
Right. World War II, the Sino-Japanese War.
Hmm.
Rice became a strategic material, so it was confiscated. Brewers were forced to use even cheaper alternatives like sweet potatoes or whatever they could find. Some factories were even converted to produce alcohol, basically, as fuel for the war effort.
Wow. What a turbulent time for traditional brewing.
Absolutely devastating. And it didn't get much better immediately after liberation. The post-war recovery, the Korean War itself, more destruction of facilities, loss of skilled brewers.
And diluted soju.
It just kept thriving. It was cheap, easy to make, perfect for a country struggling economically.
And then came the 60s. You mentioned policies then.
Yes, a really crucial moment was the Grain Control Act of 1965, under the military dictatorship. This law flat out prohibited using rice to make alcohol unless it was for export.
Prohibited rice, but that's the traditional ingredient.
Exactly. It basically hammered the final nail in the coffin for traditional distilled soju's mainstream presence at the time. It cemented diluted soju's dominance because it was the main affordable thing left. Even Max Gioli quality suffered, as brewers had to use wheat or barley instead of rice.
That's incredible. What about that local soju policy?
Yeah, the one city, one soju policy. That ran from 76 to 90, then came back briefly in 95, 96. It forced stores and restaurants in a region to buy a certain amount of soju from a designated local producer.
Creating monopolies, basically.
Pretty much. It created these regional strongholds for certain diluted soju brands. Eventually, it was ruled unconstitutional because it killed fair competition, but it shaped the market for a long time.
It's just amazing. You see how government rules, the economy, wars. They didn't just nudge things. They fundamentally changed what soju even meant to people in Korea.
Precisely. It reshaped the entire identity of the drink.
So the big takeaway here is crystal clear. Soju isn't just some drink. It's like a liquid timeline of Korea's journey, reflecting its highs and lows. This whole split between traditional and diluted is not just a technicality. It's a story of survival and change, bringing us to today, the 21st century. How has this story played out more recently for these two very different drinks?
Well, diluted soju, the green bottle stuff, it still plays a huge cultural role. It's absolutely the most common, the most familiar alcohol in Korea, a real social lubricant, across all ages.
Still the default, basically.
Pretty much. Perceptions are mixed, though. On one hand, it's seen as this comfort drink for ordinary people, especially during tough times. But on the other hand, you definitely hear criticisms. Some people call it disinfectant or fake liquor.
Yeah, I've heard that disinfectant comparison quite a bit, actually.
It really sticks, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But despite that, its connection to everyday life, hardship, makes it almost a cliche in K-dramas and movies, the scenes at the Pajamacha, the tent bars.
Totally. It's iconic in that sense.
And in drinking culture itself, diluted soju is still the benchmark for how much someone can drink.
Yeah.
And the ways people mix it.
Yeah.
Sonak soju and beer is classic.
Yeah.
But then you get soju cocktails with fruit juices,
Yeah.
yogurt drinks, even, I kid you not, mint chocolate soju mixes.
Mint chocolate, seriously.
Apparently. The creativity, or maybe desperation, is endless. Market-wise, there's still fierce regional competition, especially down south in Chungcheong, Jeolla, Gyeongsang. But nationally, as of 2024, Ichijiro is the big player.
Right. Shumasul and Jinro is back.
Exactly. And even though many use the same neutral jujang, tiny tweaks and sweeteners, the local water source, the exact ABV, they create these subtle regional preferences people really stick to.
Okay, so diluted soju is still king, culturally speaking. But what about the traditional distilled stuff? You mentioned a comeback.
Yes, while diluted soju held its dominant position, there's been this quiet, steady resurgence of traditional distilled soju. It started gradually. Policy changes around the '88 Seoul Olympics began to ease some restrictions.
Okay.
A symbolic step was designating and allowing the sale of national designated 8 traditional liquors. It was like the government saying, okay, this traditional stuff has value.
Giving it official recognition.
Exactly. Then, as Korea got wealthier in the '90s and 2000s, people's tastes started changing. It wasn't just about drinking a lot cheaply anymore. There was a growing interest in quality, in heritage.
A shift from quantity to quality.
Precisely. And that naturally led people back towards traditional spirits. This was helped massively by some smart government moves. Like in 2008, they introduced a 50% liquor tax cut specifically for traditional liquors.
That's a big incentive.
Huge. And maybe even bigger was allowing online sales starting in 2013. That was a game changer. Suddenly, people could easily buy brands like Andong Soju, these amazing traditional sojus, from anywhere in the country. Access just exploded.
Right, you didn't have to seek out a special store anymore.
Exactly. And funnily enough, the COVID-19 pandemic actually gave it another boost. With people staying home, drinking at home, many started exploring more premium traditional options.
Interesting side effect.
Yeah. So now, distilled soju, which was pretty niche for decades, you can find it quite easily in convenience stores and supermarkets. It's much more visible. And here's the funny thing. The price you pay for a single bottle of diluted soju in a restaurant. Sometimes it's about the same as buying a whole bottle of decent distilled soju from a store to take home.
That really puts the value proposition in perspective.
It does. And this comeback isn't just domestic, it's getting noticed internationally. For example, a brand called 4240 Docto 37 won a gold medal at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition in 2025 after already winning gold in the UK the year before.
Wow, that's impressive recognition.
It really is.
You mentioned earlier that some really accomplished people are getting into this now. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, it's a fascinating trend. You're seeing people with backgrounds you wouldn't expect: lawyers, former big shot corporate executives, even professors jumping into the traditional brewing game.
Really? Why?
I think it's a mix of passion for tradition, seeing a market opportunity for high-quality products, and maybe wanting to build something tangible and, culturally significant. For instance, there's a lawyer, Jung Ho-kil, who used to be a law professor and a judge. Now he runs a brewery making premium soju.
From judge to brewer.
Quite the switch. And another guy, Oh Se-young, a former exec at SK Hynix, a huge tech company. He started a smart brewery making oak-aged traditional soju, plus vodka and gin derived from traditional methods.
Bringing tech know-how to brewing.
Seems like it. And then there's Lee Jong-ki, a master brewer famous for amazing apple and amejaberry distilled spirits. His background: chemical engineering from Seoul National University, and he even spent time distilling whiskey in the UK.
So they're bringing serious expertise and innovation.
Absolutely. It's really pushing the boundaries and elevating the whole category. These aren't just hobbyists. They're creating sophisticated high-end products.
Stepping back again, how does this whole soju story connect to the bigger picture of Korea today?
Well, it's deeply interwoven. Traditional Korean alcohol, Seoul, isn't just seen as a drink anymore. It's increasingly recognized as a vital part of Korean food culture, Hansik.
Right.
And with the global rise of Hallyu, the Korean wave, well, there's huge potential for these traditional liquors internationally as exports. People are interested in Korean culture, and food and drink are a huge part of that.
So it ties into that cultural export push.
Definitely. And the South Korean government sees that. They're actively promoting traditional liquor, with those tax breaks, enabling online sales, supporting producers. They recognize its cultural and economic value.
Makes sense. What about North Korea, just briefly? Is their soju story similar?
It's a bit different. Generally, there seems to be a preference for higher alcohol content drinks up there. Their official national liquor is actually Pyongyang Soju, which is, interestingly, a diluted soju, similar in production style to the common South Korean type, though perhaps with different ingredients and flavor profiles.
Okay, good to know. Wow, what an incredible journey we've covered. From this single, precious, almost medicinal distilled spirit centuries ago to this split world, the ubiquitous, mass-produced, diluted soju that dominated for decades, and now this exciting comeback of the traditional, celebrated distilled soju.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It raises this really interesting question for the future. As traditional distilled soju keeps growing, keeps winning awards, gets more global recognition, will it eventually reclaim that original identity? Will it become the soju again in people's minds?
Or will soju just always be this tale of two very, very different spirits sharing a name?
Exactly. That's the question.
Well, that is definitely something to ponder, perhaps over your next glass, whichever type it may be. We really hope this dive encourages you, the listener, to maybe explore the different kinds of soju out there for yourself. And when you do, remember the incredible history and the deep cultural significance swirling in that little glass.